Chaim. It all begins with a large grain of sand, or perhaps a small pebble. Sand or the little pebble manages to slip in and enter the little shell. The oyster, who calls the shell his home, is irritated by this sand or pebble, but it doesn't have any arms. It can't get rid of it, right? And it's really annoying. So what does the oyster do? The oyster begins secreting layers of aragonite and conchiolin, I guess, which together form a material called nacre. And the nacre covers this little sand or pebble and protects the oyster. And the oyster is not happy. It continues secreting more and more layers over the next few years until, after a few years, what used to be a little grain of sand is now a beautiful, large, beautiful pearl that can be taken out and used in jewelry or other decorative purposes. And we have to realize that in our life, very often we have something irritating us. It might not be a grain of sand or a pebble, but we have small things that irritate us. And we have a choice. We can get angry, we can become upset, or we can choose to make our own pearl. And that's what we're going to learn about today. Chaim. So on our Seder plate, we have, of course, the matzahs under the plate, and on top we have 6 different items which are all related to the story of Pesach, to the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, except for one item which doesn't seem to have any connection. Right? The Zroya, of course, represents the Korban Pesach. The maror represents the bitterness, the 2 different types of maror, the bitterness of the slavery of Egypt. The karpas represents the hard labor, the tears that we dip it into tears. Right? We have the haroises, which represent the cement. But the egg is a little bit strange, right? The egg, what does the egg represent? We're told that it represents the Korban Chagiga. And what's the connection between the egg and a Chagiga? So we're a little upset, we're sad today, we're mourning over the fact that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, so we cannot bring the Korban Chagiga. So therefore we have an egg. An egg is a sign of mourning. But there are 2 obvious questions here. First of all, we have a Korban Chagiga not just on Pesach. We have a Korban Chagiga on Shavuos, on Sukkos, but we don't put an egg on our plate on Shavuos. And the Shavuos table or the Sukkos table, we don't put an egg on our plate. Chaim. Right? So why do we have the egg on Pesach? Right? It apparently has no connection to the Pesach story. Obviously, every Yom Tov has a Korban Chagiga, but it doesn't seem to have a connection to Pesach. And we don't actually celebrate, we don't actually put this egg out by any other Yom Tov. We pass out some fruit roll-ups, get more if they need. So, in 1881, a chassid by the name of Rabbi Fall Wiltz traveled to the city of Shkola, right? And he visited the cemetery in Shkola. Of course, he saw the gravesite of Aryeh Leib of Shkola, known as the Shkola Zayda. And right next to the Shkola Zayda's gravesite, he saw another grave. And on this grave was written the words, "Here lies buried Yosele, the holy thief. Yosele Haganav HaKadosh." And he was very curious when he saw this. This is a grave in a very special spot right next to the gravesite of one of the holiest tzaddikim. Who is Yosel, the holy thief? Right? You ever hear of a holy thief? So he began inquiring from the people of the city, and eventually the story came out. The Shpoler Zayda himself was known for his tremendous love and the care that he showed towards every Jew. No matter what level of Torah they were, whether they were the greatest Torah scholars or whether they were the lowest sinners in the city. There were even a group of Jews, there were a few Jews in the town who earned their living as Ganovim, right? It's a parnasa, right? It's a way to earn a living. Some people try to earn, everybody's got to do what they got to do. And, of course, the Shpoler Zayda tried to work with them, tried to get them to improve, but, they were what they were. And the Shpoler Zayda was always looked out for them. As a matter of fact, whenever any of the local thieves were caught and they were thrown into prison, Shpoler Zayda would make sure to visit them, to bring them kosher food, take care of them. And he used to refer to them as mein ganovim, my thieves. Right? And they say that during the high holidays, when he would speak to Hashem about the Jewish people, he would say the Jewish people are so beautiful. Right? Even the lowest Jew, even the biggest sinner amongst the Jews is full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. That's one of the reasons on Rosh Hashanah why we have a pomegranate. So he used to say, even my ganovim, even my thieves are full of mitzvahs like pomegranates. So one of these thieves was little Yossel. Yossel had a very difficult life at a young age. He was an orphan at a very young age, and he had to learn to fend for himself. And one of the methods that he found was the trade of Geneva, the trade of thievery. And he became a very good thief. He was able to pick locks very well, and he was very small and skinny. He was able to squeeze through tight spaces.
You got promoted.
What?
You kept getting promoted.
Yes, he became a very successful thief, and he joined a group of local thieves.
Oh, Jews?
And no, they weren't Jews. And usually they were a little reluctant to invite a Jew into their group, but Yossel was a very good thief, and he knew how to get the job done, and they welcomed him in. And of course, they're always trying to rob people, but in this little city of Shpoler, how many robberies can you pull off, right?
In Russia, the highest caste of thieves was the
pickpockets.
pickpocket. Yeah. It was.
So he was, Yossel was really good at that stuff, right? But the problem is in the city of Shpoler, there aren't too many rich people. There's a limit to how much money you could steal, and the thieves weren't able to make a lot of money. So they were trying to think of how could they make some good money? How could they rob somebody and get a serious amount of cash? And finally, one day, one of the thieves came up with an idea. A local church, right? In the local church, right outside the city, there's a big church. It's an old church here for many years, and it was full of gold. There were gold crosses and statues in there, right? It's gold, silver, even some diamonds there. This would make a really good opportunity for a band of thieves. But how do you get in? Right? There's very thick, heavy doors with big locks. There's even a guard outside who patrols the area. So they started to scout to go around the church, try to figure out how you can get in. And they found that all the way on top of the tower, there was a little tiny window. Most of the windows that were lower down had bars and locks on it. On the top of the tower, there was a little small window. I guess they didn't feel there was any need for protecting it. So they realized this is the way in, but how can anybody get in? It's a tiny little window. Yossel, he's our man. So they tell Yossel, you're going to go inside. And he says, of course. They work out all the details. They wait for a very dark night when it's Chodesh time, there's no moon. And the band of thieves gathers around outside the church. And Yossel begins to climb up the tower.
But you cannot go to the church.
What?
You cannot go to the church. Even to steal.
This is not something that bothered Yossel very much. Right? So Yossel climbs up to the top, and of course he has with him some ropes. And he has a whole system worked out. But he ties the rope on the top of the window, top of the tower, and he's going to lower himself down and climb back up, and then he's going to slowly lower all of the bags of gold and silver to his friends who are waiting outside. Okay, Yassel gets to the top. He ties the rope there. He puts one side of the rope down on the outside of the church. One he lowers inside, and he climbs down, and he takes out his bag, and he begins to load up all the gold and silver. Right? While Yassel's in the church, the local priest is having trouble sleeping that night. And he decided, he figures he's rolling over from one side to the other, and he's not falling asleep. And he figures we'll take a walk around outside. So he gets up, he starts walking around his house, and he decides he's going to walk near the church, and he sees a group of people standing outside the church. Right? Looks suspicious. He quickly calls the local watchman who's supposed to be patrolling. Apparently hasn't been doing his job, drank a little too much that night. And the watchman gets called, and he comes, and the thieves immediately have a lookout, and they see somebody coming, and they disappear. Right?
With the gold.
No, Yassel's inside. Yassel's getting the gold.
Oh,
Right? And Yassel's getting the gold, and his friends outside disappear. Right? Yassel finishes the bag, he climbs up the rope, and he's on top of the window, and he starts calling out to his friends. No one's answering. Right? He whistles, whatever signals they had, and no one's responding. And the priest and the watchman who are circling around the church, they hear noises, they look up on top, and they figure they see what's going on, and they decide to wait till he comes down. He starts climbing down the rope, and as he gets to the bottom, the watchman jumps out, grabs him, ties him up. Right? You're under arrest, stealing from the church. Right? And they take him off to prison. A court date is scheduled. This is not an ordinary theft. This is a theft of church property. Terrible crime. Yassel's brought in front of the court, and the prosecutor gets up and he says, it's terrible thing to steal, and not just to steal from a church. What do you have to say for yourself? They turn to Yassel, you Jew. And Yassel gets up and he says, listen, I'll tell you what happened. He says, to see what happened was, I'm a Jew, but unfortunately I'm not having any success in my parnasa. I didn't earn any money. So I thought to myself, maybe I've been praying in the synagogue all my life. Maybe I should try going to a church. Right? So I went to the church, and I come in there, and I see all these statues. Our synagogue didn't have any statues. And I look around, and I figured maybe these statues could help me. So I started to pray to them, and I tried talking to them. I'm looking at them, and they're not looking at me. They're not looking back at me. And I tried talking to them, and no one's responding. And I'm like, why would somebody talk to this dead piece of wood or dead piece of gold? And I figured maybe it'll still work. So I tried to pray. I came back the next night. I prayed night after night, and it's not working. And then I noticed that the statues are made out of gold, and I figured, maybe this is the answer to my prayers, right? And I've been praying for money, I've been praying for parnasa, and there's gold right in front of me. So I figured I'll take it, right? This must be the answer to my prayers.
The gods are answering.
And the priest gets very angry. He gets up in court. He starts yelling at, what are you talking about? It's not answer to your prayers. These are our gods. And he says, those are your gods? Really? Gold and silver? Listen, in that case, I figured I'll help you out. I'll get rid of these fake gods, right? And the judge gets up, starts yelling at Yassel. He orders the guards to keep him quiet. And he says, for such a terrible crime, not only did you steal from the church, you made a mockery of us, you made a joke out of your crime in court. You're sentenced to be burnt in public. Right? Be burnt in public, be burnt in the center of the town in a few days. The priest immediately gets up and he says, Your Honor, the church is willing to show mercy towards Yassel, the thief. On one condition, on the condition that he gives up his faith and becomes a Christian. And Yassel looks at him and he says, really? You think I'm that stupid, right? I made some terrible mistakes in my life. But such a terrible mistake is not something I'm ever going to do. Okay, fine. He's thrown back into prison. A few days later, the entire town gathers in the marketplace. And Yassel's brought out. and he's placed next to a big burning barrel of tar, pitch, tar, whatever they used. And the priest again gets up and he says, Yassel, you have a chance, an opportunity. We're willing to show you mercy, we're willing to show you clemency, we're willing to show you kindness, even though you did such a terrible thing. You know, the religion of kindness and love is willing to forgive all the crimes that you did on condition that you give up your faith. And Yassel gets up and looks around at the crowd that's gathered around him, and he says, you know, I haven't been a very good Jew. I have not done what Hashem told me to do. I have not studied Torah. I have not done too many mitzvahs in my life. But with all that, I'm lucky to have been born a Jew, and I will not give that up for anything. I was born a Jew, and I will die a Jew. Yassel's lifted up, and the priest orders to have his legs lowered down into the barrel of burning tar. He begins to scream and yell, and then the priest orders to take him out. And Yassel's standing there half dead. He can barely stand. People are holding him up. The guards are holding him up. The soldiers are holding him up. And again, the priest turns to him and he says, Yassel, there's one more chance. One more chance. If you just say the word, we're going to call the best doctors. They'll come in. They'll cure all the terrible burns that you have. You just got to accept our faith. And Yassel could barely talk now. But he works up the strength to yell out. He says, I was born a Jew and I will die a Jew. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And those were his last words. When he was, of course, afterwards, when his body was given over to the Jewish community, the Shvaler Zayda requested that he write on his grave, Yassel Haganev HaKadosh, the holy thief. And that year on Rosh Hashanah, he got up and shul. He said, Hashem, look at my beautiful thieves. Look at my thieves, the lowest Jew, right? Look at how full of mitzvahs they are. Look at what he's ready to do. So this is not an isolated story. When we look throughout Jewish history, we find many Jews who, when times were good, when throughout their life, they weren't so connected to Torah. But as soon as they were put in a situation where their life was in danger, where they faced persecution, which unfortunately the Jewish nation has faced countless times throughout our history, right? We see how even Jews who didn't have such a strong connection to Hashem, as soon as we were faced with a situation like this, suddenly the neshama, the little piece of Hashem that's inside of us comes out. That's when the true essence of a Jew comes out. And even somebody who might not have spent his life studying Torah, when he was put in this situation, he was willing to give up everything for Hashem and for his Torah. Rab Mordechai was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, of the third Chabad Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek sent Rab Mordechai around to travel around through the Russian countryside, the little villages, and to travel around to small Jewish communities and inspire the Jews living over there, to teach them, to inspire them. And during one of his trips, it was between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and he finds himself Erev Yom Kippur in this little Russian village, and he hears the Jewish community there, so he comes there, he wants to spend Yom Kippur there. When he comes, he finds that it's empty. All the Jews had left. They had gone to the big city, they didn't want to be in this little village for Yom Kippur. They had gone to the big city to be in the big shul over there. So he begins asking, is there a Jewish community? It's a few hours before Yom Kippur. Who is what? This is Reb Mordechai, a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he begins asking, is there a shul nearby? Is there a place? Are there Jews nearby? And the people who are there, they tell him there's the Jews in our village all left. It'll take you too long to get to the big city. It's a day's travel. But there is a community of Cantonists nearby. Right? What were the Cantonistim? The Cantonistim were Jews who were drafted. Right? Jews who were drafted into the Russian army. They were taken into the army. Some of them, I think officially it started at age 12. But there were those who were even taken at younger ages. They were torn away from their parents in the Russian army. And they were from 12 to 18, they were in training. which it wasn't really military training, it was religious training, which the point of the training was to make them forget who they were, to make them forget about Yiddishkeit.
Yeah.
And then after they turned 18, they were finally able to join the army, where they stayed for 25 years. So, minimum 25 years. Which meant that by the time they left the army, what? No, 25 years. That was their service. Yes.
43 years old.
So they were at least 43 years old by the time they left the army. Now, once they left the army at 43, there was very little that they were able to do. They went back to their communities. What are they supposed to do? They didn't know anything about living, what it means to live as a Jew. They had never received, they had, some of them had received an education many, many years ago. Many of them had forgotten what they learned. And coming back at 43, trying to get married and start families was a very, very difficult thing. So there were some of them who were able to do it. There are many stories, Cantonists who came back and started a life, started a family, but most of them were not able to. And most of them kind of were, they tried to rejoin the community, but they felt out of place. So what many of them did is they kind of started their own communities. They started their own communities of Cantonistim. And there was such a community nearby. So when Mordechai heard this, it's the only place to be for Yom Kippur, so he decided to go there. When he came, they were very excited to have a chassid, a rabbi there to lead there. They asked him if he could lead the prayers, the Yom Kippur prayers, and he agreed. And they told him that they would like him to lead all the Yom Kippur prayers except for Ne'ilah, except for the final prayer. The final prayer, they said that they're going to lead. The Cantonists themselves are going to lead. Okay? So Mordechai davens there, very inspiring Yom Kippur. And finally, it comes time for Ne'ilah. And this big, tall, wide, strong-looking soldier gets up to be chazan for Ne'ilah. He walks up to the bima in the middle of the shul, and the first thing he does is he takes off, he removes his gartel, and he takes off whatever clothing he was wearing, his suit, I don't know if they wore patas, whatever they wore, and he takes off his jacket, and he starts unbuttoning his shirt. And Mordechai's about to run up and tell him, you got to wear shirts for shul. You're not supposed to take off your shirt. And the guy removes his shirt, and Mordechai takes one look, and he sees his whole back is covered in bruises. It's red. There's cuts and bruises there. And Mordechai stops and realizes that there's a reason for this. And the soldier gets up and he says, Hashem, listen. Look at me. Look at my body. My body will bear testimony to everything that I've went through. Every one of these bruises that I got was for your sake, Hashem. It was for you. It was for you. Right? This bruise over here is because I didn't want to eat non-kosher food. This big cut I have now on my back is because I refused to work on Shabbos. And he starts enumerating the different bruises that he has, the different lashes that he got, different beatings that he received. And finally he concludes and he says, Hashem, it's Yom Kippur today. And we turn to you and we ask you to give the entire world, the entire Jewish community, a good year, a sweet year. And we ask you to take the Jewish people, take us out of Galus already, and bring us back to Yerushalayim. And why are we asking this of you, Hashem? Are we asking this of you for our own sake? Are we asking this of you for our families? We're not asking for us. We're not asking for our own lives. We don't have a life. We're not asking for our families. None of us here has a family. We're asking this on behalf of our fellow Jews, but mainly for you, Hashem. For your own honor, for your own Shekhinah. Take your people back and bring us and redeem us and bring us home. Asay leman shemecha, do it for your own sake. And at that point, he got down from the Amud and they started. And our Mordechai came back. Of course, he told Tzemach Tzedek about the story. And of course, this is again one of the many stories where we find Jews who are torn away from their parents, torn away from their home. And instead of weakening their, right, the whole point of the Cantonist decree was to tear Jewish people away from Hashem, right? But it didn't work. It didn't work. There may have been instances where it worked, but overall, many of them, not only weren't they weakened, wasn't their Emunah weakened, their Emunah was strengthened after everything they went through. L'chaim, l'chaim. While we look for the next story, l'chaim, l'chaim. Let's see. Yeah. Thank you. So, in the city, in the village of Likova, somewhere in Russia, lived a Jew by the name of Rav Koppel. This is about 250 years ago. Rav Koppel. And Rav Koppel had a kretschme. He had a tavern. And everyone, all the local villagers used to come to drink by him. And that's how he earned his parnasa. He rented it from the local pirates. And this is how he earned his living. And it was very difficult for him, to live in a little village by himself. There was no Jewish community there. And every year before Pesach, he had a problem, right? He had lots of l'chaim, lots of vodka, lots of whiskey, and Pesach, you're not allowed to have it. So he would go to one of the local villagers, and he would sell him all of the vodka that he had, all of the barrels of vodka and whiskey that he owned. One year, the local priest decides this is a good opportunity. He goes over to the villager who would usually buy the chametz, and he tells him, every year you buy all of the vodka and the whiskey from Reb Koppel, right? Does he pay you well? And he says, well, he gives me a little bit of vodka. He gives me a bottle after Pesach. So the priest says to him, instead of one bottle, how would you like to get all of his whiskey? He said, that would be wonderful. And he says, this year when he comes to you to sell the whiskey, tell him no. Tell him no. Right? He's going to have no choice. He's not going to be able to sell it. So he's going to have two choices. Either he's going to have to stop keeping his silly mitzvahs, or he's going to have to give away all of his vodka and his whiskey. Right? And the priest goes around to all the villagers. He tells them of this plan. And he tells everybody not to tell Rav Koppel anything, and not to tell Rav Koppel anything until Erev Pesach. Right? Erev Pesach, Rav Koppel's getting ready for Pesach. It's the morning, Erev Pesach, he goes over to his neighbor and he says, you buy every year the chametz, I'd like to sell you the chametz. He says, no, I don't want to buy it this year. And he says, if you agree to buy it after Pesach, you could earn a little bit. I can give you a good bottle of vodka, maybe 2 bottles of vodka this year. He says, no, this year I'm not buying it. Okay, fine, I'll find somebody else. He goes to the next neighbor, he goes from one door to the other, and everybody refuses. Everybody turns him down. Right? Pretty soon he realizes what's going on, and he realizes he has no choice. So he goes over to his tavern. He opens up the door of the tavern. He takes all the barrels and he puts it right outside the front door. And he says, that's it. Hefker. It's free for all. Anybody who wants to take it. He goes home and he had the best Pesach of his life. He came home. He said, that Pesach, right? Every year you sell your chametz. Right? But it's, you're selling your chametz and, after Pesach you're going to get it back. This year, he really got rid of all of his chametz. Right? Now, he had no idea what he's going to do after Pesach. The whiskey and the vodka that he bought wasn't his own money. It was borrowed money. Right? Loans he had taken out to get it. And now he wouldn't have a penny to his name. He would be in debt after Pesach. But for the first time, he truly fulfilled the mitzvah of getting rid of all of his chametz. And he said that Pesach was the best Pesach he ever had in his life. After Pesach, he figured, he didn't know what to do. He's going to have to close down his tavern, but he'll go try to figure out how to pay the debts. He goes back to his tavern the morning after Pesach, and he sees a group of people gathered around. Group of goyim gathered around his tavern, and they see him coming, and they say, "Reb Koppel, what games are you playing with us?" So what are you talking about? He says, "You're supposed to give up your vodka." And he says, "I did. He says, yeah, but what's the point if you have a group of watchdogs guarding your vodka? And a couple comes closer, and there's a circle around this tavern. Circle of wild dogs had gathered around and had guarded the vodka throughout Pesach. Right? As soon as our couple came, all the dogs left, and our couple comes in, and all the vodka's there. And at this point, there are two different versions of the story. Right? One version of the story is a couple is very happy, turned to Hashem.
If it's not sold, it's not kosher anymore.
Well, he made it hefker. He made it publicly. He said in public, anybody who wants to take it. If dogs decide to guard it, that doesn't change halacha, right? So in one version of the story, a couple says, listen, okay, thank you, Hashem, for giving me the vodka. He takes the vodka back into the tavern, and everything worked out. But in another version of the story, a couple wasn't happy, right? He said what you said. He said that I didn't, maybe I didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly. Right? I didn't truly make it hefker. No one's able to take it. And not only that, if I take it now, it's going to look as if I didn't really mean to sell it. It's going to, the people around here think that I put the dogs to protect them. They don't know it's some miracle that took place. So if I take this vodka and whiskey back, I'm going to be giving up my mitzvah. That's how he felt. That's what he felt. Now, whether this is right or whether halachically there's no obligation to do it, but that's what Rav Koppel felt. So he took the barrels of vodka and whiskey and he rolled them down the road to the river at the end of the town and he threw them into the river.
Why didn't he give it to the guys?
That's how the story goes. Maybe they took it from the river, but he wanted to get rid of it. Right? He threw it into the river. Now, shortly after this, a couple's daughter gave birth to a son. A couple's daughter gave birth to a son who later grew up to be the big tzaddik, the Chayza of Lublin. So again, we have a case where a person does a mitzvah, right? Every year he did a mitzvah. He did a mitzvah beautifully. Every year he sold his chametz, right? But then there comes a point when someone tries to stop him from doing a mitzvah, right? Someone tries to stop the mitzvah from being done. But instead of stopping him from doing the mitzvah, what do? They helped him do the mitzvah in the best way possible, better than he had ever done it throughout his entire life. And this is true throughout our history, right? If you look throughout Jewish history, you find that every time the Jewish people are persecuted, instead of weakening our connection to Torah, it strengthened us. It made us stronger. It made us closer to Hashem, right? You look back at starting with Golus Mitzrayim, right? The Jewish nation was a tiny little nation. 70 people. It wasn't even a nation. It was a family of 70 people, right?
Yeah.
The Egyptians started to persecute the Jewish people.
I gotta know.
Right? What happens when the Egyptians start to persecute the Jewish people?
Yeah.
A small family of 70 people over 210 years turns into a nation of 600,000, even more, over 1 million if you count the women and children.
That's
right? 600,000 men, adult men, right? And if we look further, we look at every other time the Jewish people were persecuted, right? You look at the Babylonians who came in and they destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash. They sent the Jews into exile, right? What happened? Hashem comes along. He says, "Well, ehi lahem lemikdash ma'at." The Jewish people don't have a temple anymore, but everywhere they go, we can make our own temple. We can make our own little Beis Hamikdash. Until the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, no such thing as a shul. Right, I'm sure the Jewish people daven in different places, but there wasn't this idea that we can build our own little Beis Hamikdash wherever we go. And this came out of the persecution, right? You take a look at the persecution that took place afterwards, right? Every time the Jewish people were persecuted, right? Whether it was the persecution of Haman, right, which ultimately led to the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, right? Whether it was the persecution of the Greeks that started the Hashmonaim dynasty, whether it was the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash and the exile of the Jewish people, perhaps one of the greatest calamities, the greatest destruction to happen in the Jewish history, right? The Romans who destroyed the Jewish people and sent us to the Gullus. What happened? Right after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Mishnah was written. The Mishnah was written. Until then, you went to a Jewish home and there was a bookshelf. How many books were in a Jewish bookshelf? 24 books. 24 books. There might have been some commentary on those books. 24 books. Right? There was only Torah Shebek Saf. after the Jewish people were sent into Galus, after the second Temple was destroyed, that's when Torah Shabbat Peh came about. Right? That's when they decided to write down Torah Shabbat Peh. And now you walk into the Jewish home, there are thousands of books. Right? There's no way to even have all the books that on Torah that were for one person to collect all the books that were written. Right? And we continue looking throughout our history. We look at every time the Jewish people were persecuted, they became stronger. Right? Just the most recent example, you take a look at the Holocaust, right? Again, perhaps the worst tragedy to happen in Jewish history, the greatest destruction, right? But that's what took the Jewish nation, right? It allowed us to spread throughout the world, allowed us to go back to our land, right? And allowed us to become stronger today than we were before. And this is really, this says the Chassam Sofer is the reason why we take an egg and we put it on our Seder plates. If you look at any other food that we have, you take the food, you put it in a pot, and you cook it. What happens to the food?
It boils.
It begins to boil. It's in a boiling pot of water, and it starts to become softer. You take meat, you put it in a pot, it starts to soften. You cook it for longer, it becomes softer and softer until it falls apart, right? It falls apart, right? You take vegetables, meat, fruits, whatever you want to take and put it into a pot of boiling water. It starts to soften until it eventually falls apart. And this is what happened to every other nation in the world. You take a look at every other nation that was around 3,000 years ago. What happened? Some of them may have been very strong and powerful nations, but when they were put into a pot with boiling water, they fell apart. They fell apart, right? Eventually, they disappeared entirely. An egg is different. An egg, you take a soft egg, you put it into a pot. What happens? It becomes hard. The longer you leave it, the harder and more rubbery it'll become, tougher it becomes, right? Not only that, not only does the egg itself become hard and solid and stick together, but the egg is used to hold other foods that you want to cook together. You don't want your foods to fall apart. You want something to hold together. What? You want your potatoes to stick together. You put an egg inside.
You put in chunks, right?
I don't put eggs in chunks. Some people do. But an egg is used to hold, to strengthen things and hold things together when you're in a pot of boiling water. And this, says the Chassam Sofer, is what we're celebrating with the egg on Pesach. We're thanking Hashem that even throughout the Egyptian exile, Kasher Ya'anu Oisai came year bevachin yifretz. As we suffered, as we were persecuted, instead of becoming weaker, instead of falling apart, we became stronger and more united. And this is why we have the egg on our Seder plate. And this is something that we all have to realize. We all have to realize that we all find ourselves, we have in our, first of all, the Jewish nation in general is going throughout our history, and at all times today, I mean, we thought the persecution was over, but we see today, over the last year, how, it's not. And we have to realize that every time our nation is persecuted, we become stronger. But not only as a nation, every one of us individually, right? For a couple, when he himself had a hard time performing the mitzvah, that mitzvah became so much stronger. And we have to realize that when there's a little pebble, when there's a grain of sand that's irritating us, we can get upset, we can blow up and explode over what's irritating us, and we can fall apart. Or we can be like the egg, we can become stronger when we're under persecution. And l'chaim, we should all use all of the pebbles, take all the pebbles and sand and irritants in our life and turn them into pearls. L'chaim. Amen.